May 9, 1940, Fort Even-Emile, Belgium. Major Jean Lucien watched in disbelief as German paratroopers emerged from gliders that had landed silently on the fort's roof. Within minutes, the fortress that was supposed to hold for days had been neutralized by 78 men using tactics that Belgian intelligence had never anticipated. The fort's defensive plans, its gun positions, its garrison strength, all had been documented in reports, typed on standard military typewriters, and filed in Belgian headquarters. 3 hours later, those same documents were in German hands. German intelligence officers photographed every page, cataloging information about Belgian defenses, troop dispositions, and communication networks. The typewritten reports were clear, organized, and devastatingly informative to an enemy who knew how to exploit them. What Major Lucien could not have known was that German success at Even-Emile resulted not just from tactical innovation but from a revolution in battlefield intelligence that had been developing since 1938. At the heart of this revolution was a device that seemed unremarkable, a portable typewriter specifically designed for military field use, capable of producing multiple copies of reports instantly, and rugged enough to function in combat conditions. While historians focus on dramatic intelligence achievements, code-breaking at Bletchley Park, the double-cross system, Operation Fortitude, they often overlook the mundane but critical infrastructure that made intelligence operations possible. Codes could be broken, but the decrypted information had to be typed, copied, and distributed. Agents could gather information, but their reports had to be processed and analyzed. Commanders could make decisions, but their orders had to be transmitted to subordinate units. All of these functions required typewriters. Not just any typewriters, but machines that could function reliably under battlefield conditions, produce legible documents quickly, create multiple copies simultaneously, and remain portable enough to accompany combat units. The development of such machines, their deployment across theaters of war, and their impact on intelligence operations represents one of World War II's most important but least known technological achievements. Today we will examine every aspect of this story. We will trace the development of portable military typewriters from civilian origins to specialized military equipment. We will follow their deployment from headquarters to frontline units. We will understand how they revolutionized intelligence processing, enabling real-time tactical intelligence that gave Allied forces decisive advantages. We will explore the security implications of typewritten documents and the measures taken to protect them. And we will hear from the intelligence officers, clerks, and commanders who used these machines daily, understanding how a simple device became essential to modern warfare. This is the story of how a battlefield typewriter helped win the intelligence war. To understand why portable typewriters became essential to military operations, we must first understand the intelligence problem facing armies in the early 20th century. Information has always been critical to warfare, but the scale, complexity, and speed of modern warfare created information management challenges unprecedented in military history. Consider the intelligence cycle in World War I. Information was collected through various means: aerial reconnaissance, prisoner interrogations, signal interception, scout patrols, and civilian reports. This raw information had to be processed at intelligence sections, where officers would analyze it, correlate it with other information, and produce intelligence assessments. These assessments would then be distributed to commanders who would make tactical decisions. Finally, orders based on those decisions would be communicated to subordinate units. Every step of this process involved documents. Reconnaissance reports had to be written. Interrogation transcripts had to be recorded. Signal intercepts had to be transcribed. Analysis had to be documented. Intelligence summaries had to be prepared. Orders had to be drafted. And all of these documents had to be copied multiple times for distribution to various headquarters, staff sections, and subordinate units. In World War I, this documentation was produced almost entirely by hand. Intelligence officers wrote reports in longhand. Clerks copied them by hand for distribution. The process was slow, error-prone, and limited in scale. A single intelligence report might take an hour to write and another hour to copy 3 times. An intelligence summary covering a division's front might require a full day to prepare and distribute. The consequences were severe. Intelligence became stale by the time it reached commanders. Different headquarters received different versions of the same information due to copying errors. The volume of intelligence that could be processed was limited by how fast humans could write. and the handwritten documents were often illegible, leading to misunderstandings and mistakes. The obvious solution was typewriters. By 1914, typewriters were common in civilian offices. They produced legible text much faster than handwriting. They could create multiple copies using carbon paper, and skilled typists could produce documents with remarkable speed and accuracy. Military headquarters began using typewriters for administrative work before World War I, and their use expanded rapidly during the war. But typewriters had significant limitations for military applications. Standard office typewriters of the 1910s and 1920s were heavy, typically weighing 15 to 25 pounds or more. They were fragile, with delicate mechanisms that could be damaged by rough handling or exposure to dust and moisture. They required desks or stable tables to operate effectively. And they needed electricity for facilities that had electric typewriters, or, at minimum, required stable surfaces that were unavailable in field conditions. These limitations meant typewriters remained confined to rear area headquarters, where conditions approximated civilian offices. Frontline units, intelligence sections with forward commands, and mobile operations continued relying on handwritten documents. The disconnect created delays and inefficiencies. Intelligence collected at the front would be written by hand, carried to rear headquarters, then typed for distribution. The process could take hours or even days. The interwar period saw limited progress. The military establishments of most nations were consumed by debates about armor, aircraft, and mechanization. Administrative equipment received minimal attention and smaller budgets. Some portable typewriters entered military service lightweight models designed for traveling salesmen and journalists, but these machines were neither rugged enough nor specifically designed for military requirements. The situation was particularly acute for intelligence operations, where the volume and sensitivity of information demanded both speed and security. Intelligence officers in the 1920s and 1930s identified several specific requirements that existing typewriters failed to meet. First, true portability. Intelligence officers needed machines that could accompany field units, be carried by a single person without difficulty, operate without fixed installations, and function reliably despite rough handling during movement. Second, durability. Field conditions included exposure to weather, dust, mud, extreme temperatures, and mechanical shock from transportation in vehicles or on pack animals. Typewriters had to function reliably in these conditions without frequent maintenance. Third, ease of operation. Not all intelligence personnel were trained typists. The machines needed to be intuitive enough that personnel with minimal typing skills could produce legible documents. Touch typing perfection was less important than basic functionality. Fourth, the ability to create multiple copies. Intelligence reports needed distribution to multiple recipients simultaneously. Carbon paper could create copies, but the process required proper alignment and pressure. Typewriters needed mechanisms that ensured carbon copies were legible, even when operators had limited experience. Fifth, field maintainability. Repairs had to be possible with basic tools and without specialized facilities. Replacement parts needed to be standardized and available through military supply channels. Sixth, security considerations. Typewritten documents could be read by anyone who captured them. Some way of securing sensitive documents beyond simple classification markings was desirable, though this proved difficult to implement practically. The German military, preparing for the war they believed inevitable after Hitler's rise to power, recognized these requirements earlier and more systematically than other nations. The Wehrmacht's Abwehr, military intelligence service, and the various general staff sections responsible for intelligence collection and analysis studied the problem. Beginning in 1935, their analysis concluded that existing commercial portable typewriters came closest to meeting requirements but needed modifications for military service. The Abwehr issued specifications to several Swiss and German manufacturers, requesting lightweight portable typewriters with specific features: weight under 10 pounds, operation on uneven surfaces, resistance to dust and moisture, simplified maintenance, and rugged construction. Several manufacturers responded, but the Swiss company Pyrs A, makers of the Hermes Baby portable typewriter, provided the most promising design. The Hermes Baby had been introduced in 1935 as a civilian portable typewriter aimed at journalists and traveling businessmen. At 8.8 pounds, it was among the lightest portable typewriters available. Its compact design measured just 11 inches wide, 11 inches deep, and 3.5 inches high when closed in its case. The standard civilian Hermes baby already possessed many desirable characteristics. Its mechanism was relatively simple and robust. It operated reliably without requiring a perfectly level surface. The keyboard layout was standard, making it familiar to trained typists. And the manufacturing quality was excellent, with precision Swiss engineering ensuring consistent performance. But the military application required modifications. The Wehrmacht contracted with Pyar for a militarized version that would incorporate several changes. From the civilian model, the case would be reinforced with metal corners and improved latches capable of withstanding military handling. The finish would be more durable, resisting scratches and corrosion. The ribbon mechanism would be modified to accept military specification ribbons that were more resistant to drying out in storage. The keys would be slightly modified for use with gloved hands in winter conditions. And perhaps most importantly, the entire machine would be designed for easier field maintenance, with certain components made more accessible and replacement parts standardized across units. The militarized Hermes baby entered German military service in limited numbers in 1938, primarily with intelligence units and headquarters staff. Initial feedback was extremely positive. Intelligence officers reported that they could process significantly more information when they had access to portable typewriters. Reports that previously took hours to handwrite and distribute could be typed in minutes and duplicated immediately using carbon paper. The British were slower to recognize the requirement. The War Office had some portable typewriters in service before 1939, but these were standard commercial models used primarily for administrative rather than operational purposes. British intelligence services, particularly MI6 and MI5, did use typewriters extensively, but these were typically standard office machines operated in fixed facilities. The Americans faced similar limitations. The U.S. military had invested in mechanization, communications, and weapons development during the 1930s, but administrative equipment received low priority. Some portable typewriters were in service, but not in numbers that would support large-scale intelligence operations. The assumption was that proper intelligence work would be conducted at established headquarters with full office facilities. This assumption would prove badly mistaken once the war began. The German Blitzkrieg demonstrated that intelligence operations had to keep pace with rapidly moving combat formations. Fixed headquarters were vulnerable to being bypassed or overrun. Intelligence that took days to process was useless for tactical decisions. And the sheer volume of information generated by modern warfare radio intercepts, aerial reconnaissance, prisoner interrogations, captured documents exceeded the processing capacity of traditional handwritten methods. The fall of France in 1940 provided a wake-up call for the Allies. After-action reports noted that German intelligence operations were notably more efficient than Allied equivalents. German commanders received intelligence summaries that were current, comprehensive, and professionally formatted. Allied commanders received handwritten notes that were often incomplete and outdated. Investigation revealed that German units down to regiment level often had portable typewriters for intelligence work, while British and French units typically did not. The Germans were processing 10 times more intelligence information per officer than their Allied counterparts, not because German officers were more skilled, but because they had better tools. The recognition that portable typewriters represented a critical capability gap prompted urgent procurement efforts by Allied nations in 1940 and 1941. But converting this recognition into actual equipment in the hands of intelligence officers proved more complicated than simply ordering typewriters from manufacturers. The British War Office initiated the procurement program in July 1940, just weeks after the Dunkirk evacuation. The initial requirement called for 5,000 portable typewriters to be delivered within 6 months for distribution to intelligence sections, signals units, and headquarters staff. The specification emphasized portability, durability, and the ability to produce multiple copies with carbon paper. Several problems emerged immediately. First, Britain's typewriter manufacturing capacity was limited. The primary British manufacturer, Imperial Typewriters, was already operating at full capacity producing standard office machines for government ministries and military administrative sections. Retooling for portable typewriter production would take months and reduce overall output. Second, The specification for military portable typewriters was more demanding than civilian models. The machines had to function reliably in conditions that would destroy standard portable typewriters: exposure to rain, dust, extreme cold, rough handling during transport, and operation on unstable surfaces. This required design modifications that couldn't be implemented quickly. Third, the demand for 5,000 machines was just the beginning. As the requirement was studied more carefully, the actual need was estimated at over 50,000 machines for British forces alone, assuming one portable typewriter per intelligence section at regiment level and above, plus reserves for replacement and maintenance. The solution involved multiple parallel efforts. Imperial typewriters would continue producing standard machines while designing a militarized, portable typewriter that could enter production once tooling was ready. In the interim, Britain would procure existing portable typewriter models from any available source, accepting that these civilian machines would require more frequent replacement and maintenance. The procurement effort looked to North America, where typewriter manufacturing capacity was substantial, and neutral America could supply Britain under cash-and-carry arrangements. The Remington Rand Corporation, one of America's largest typewriter manufacturers, offered its Remington portable model. Corona Typewriter Company offered the Corona Sterling, and the Royal Typewriter Company offered its Royal Portable. Britain placed orders for 10,000 mixed portable typewriters in August 1940 to be delivered over the following year. These would be distributed to intelligence sections as an interim measure while proper military specification machines were developed. The orders specified standard QWERTY keyboard layout, the ability to produce at least 3 carbon copies, weight not exceeding 12 pounds, and inclusion of a protective carrying case. The delivery and distribution of these machines revealed logistical challenges nobody had fully anticipated. Typewriters required spare parts, particularly ribbons, which would be consumed and need regular replacement. A typewriter producing 20 pages per day would exhaust a standard ribbon in approximately 2 weeks. With thousands of machines in service, ribbon consumption would reach millions of units per year. Spare ribbons had to be procured, stored, and distributed through military supply channels. This required establishing typewriter ribbon as a formal supply item with stock numbers, storage requirements, and distribution procedures. The logistics branch, already stretched by demands for ammunition, fuel, food, and spare parts for vehicles and weapons, now had to accommodate office supplies as an essential military commodity. The training requirement was also significant. While many military personnel had typing skills from civilian life, a substantial number did not. Intelligence sections receiving typewriters needed at least some personnel who could operate them efficiently. The military established typewriter training programs at various bases, teaching basic typing skills to intelligence specialists who would be assigned typewriters. The training emphasized functional competence rather than secretarial proficiency. Intelligence officers didn't need to achieve 60 words per minute with perfect accuracy. They needed to produce legible reports at perhaps 20 to 30 words per minute, which was still far faster than handwriting. The training typically required 20 to 40 hours of instruction, after which students could type adequately for military purposes. Security considerations complicated the procurement and distribution process. Typewriters themselves were not classified equipment, but their use raised security concerns. Every typewriter has unique characteristics in how its keys strike the paper. These typewriter fingerprints could potentially be used to trace documents back to specific machines and therefore to specific units or locations. MI5 and MI6 studied whether documents should be typed using machines whose typewriter fingerprints were unknown to the enemy. This proved impractical for most military use. The sheer volume of documents and number of machines made tracking individual fingerprints impossible. But for very high-level intelligence and deception operations, special typewriters with deliberately obscured characteristics were used to type documents intended to mislead German intelligence. The American entry into the war in December 1941 created both opportunities and challenges for typewriter procurement. America's vast manufacturing capacity meant essentially unlimited production potential for military equipment, including typewriters. But America now needed to equip its own rapidly expanding military, which would require hundreds of thousands of typewriters of all types. The U.S. Army's procurement specifications, issued in early 1942, called for 3 categories of typewriters: standard office machines for administrative sections, portable machines for field use, and specialized machines for code and cipher work. The portable typewriter category specified weight under 15 pounds, operation without electricity, production of 4 carbon copies, and durability for field conditions. Multiple manufacturers competed for contracts. Remington, Royal, Corona, Smith Corona, and Underwood all submitted designs. The Army evaluated them through testing that simulated field conditions. The machines were exposed to dust, dropped from heights up to 3 feet, operated on tilted surfaces, subjected to temperature extremes, and required to function after being transported in vehicles over rough roads. The Royal Quiet Deluxe, a portable model weighing 13.5 pounds, emerged as one of the most successful designs. It combined adequate portability with robust construction and excellent typing quality. The Army ordered 100,000 units in the initial contract, with options for millions more if the war continued. Similar orders went to other manufacturers, ensuring adequate supply while avoiding dependence on any single source. The Soviet Union, receiving extensive Lend-Lease equipment from America and Britain, also received thousands of portable typewriters. This created an unusual requirement. Some machines needed Cyrillic keyboards rather than Latin characters. Several manufacturers produced special Cyrillic keyboard versions, though the majority of machines supplied to the USSR had standard English keyboards and were used by liaison units and for documents in English. By 1943, portable typewriters had become standard equipment in Allied military units at remarkably low organizational levels. American practice specified 1 portable typewriter per battalion intelligence section, plus additional machines at higher headquarters. British practice was similar, with portable typewriters organic to battalion headquarters and intelligence sections. The numbers were staggering. The U.S. Army alone had approximately 650,000 typewriters of all types in service by 1945, including over 200,000 portables. The British Armed Forces had approximately 150,000 typewriters total, with perhaps 50,000 portables. Even conservative estimates suggest over 1 million military typewriters were in use by Allied forces by 1944, with portables comprising perhaps 30 to 40% of the total. This represented an enormous industrial effort. A portable typewriter contained approximately 2,500 individual parts, many requiring precision machining. Manufacturing each machine required dozens of hours of skilled labor. The supply chain involved steel mills producing raw materials, foundries casting frames, machine shops producing precision components, assembly facilities putting machines together, and testing procedures ensuring quality. The diversion of manufacturing capacity to typewriters meant that capacity was not available for other products. Each typewriter required steel that could have built part of a tank, machine tools that could have produced weapons components, and labor that could have assembled other equipment. The decision to procure typewriters in such quantities reflected a judgment that the intelligence and administrative advantages justified the resource allocation. This judgment would be validated repeatedly in combat operations from 1942 onward, as Allied commanders demonstrated consistent intelligence advantages over their Axis counterparts. The advantage didn't come from any single factor, but from the cumulative effect of processing more information faster and distributing it more effectively, capabilities enabled in large part by the humble battlefield typewriter. The deployment of portable typewriters to field intelligence sections created a qualitative change in how tactical intelligence was collected, processed, and disseminated. To understand this revolution, we must examine specific intelligence workflows and how typewriters transformed each stage of the process. Consider a typical tactical intelligence scenario from the North African campaign in 1942. British battalion operating near El Alamein captures a German prisoner during a patrol. The prisoner is brought to battalion headquarters for interrogation by the battalion intelligence officer. The interrogation reveals information about German unit dispositions, recent reinforcements, morale conditions, and planned operations. Before portable typewriters, the intelligence officer would conduct the interrogation, taking handwritten notes. After the interrogation, he would write a formal intelligence report summarizing the information obtained. If the information was significant enough to warrant immediate distribution, he would hand-carry his handwritten report to brigade headquarters, where staff officers would read it and possibly copy relevant portions by hand for further distribution. to other battalions or to division headquarters. This process typically took 3 to 6 hours from capture to distribution, even for high-priority information. Much of that time involved physically writing the reports and copying them. The quality of the reports varied dramatically based on the intelligence officer's handwriting and writing skills, and opportunities for errors multiplied with each handwritten copy. With a portable typewriter, the workflow changed fundamentally. The intelligence officer still conducted the interrogation and took handwritten notes. But immediately after the interrogation, he moved to his typewriter and produced a formal typed report. Using carbon paper, he created 4 copies simultaneously, 1 for battalion files, 1 for brigade, 1 for division, and 1 for neighboring units if information sharing was appropriate. The typed report was produced in perhaps 20 minutes, compared to an hour or more for handwritten versions. The report was legible, organized according to standard format, and professional in appearance. Most importantly, all 4 copies were identical, eliminating transcription errors. Motorcycle couriers could deliver the reports to their destinations within another 30 to 40 minutes. The total time from capture to distribution had been reduced from 3 to 6 hours to perhaps 90 minutes. But the improvement was not just speed, it was reliability and comprehensiveness. Commanders receiving typed reports could read them quickly and extract information efficiently. The reports could be filed systematically for reference. And the existence of multiple identical copies meant everyone was working from the same information. This transformation occurred across every category of intelligence activity. Aerial reconnaissance provided another example. Reconnaissance aircraft would photograph enemy positions, land at their base, and have their film developed and interpreted by photo intelligence specialists. These specialists would identify significant targets, unit locations, defensive positions, and other intelligence information. Before typewriters, the photo interpreters would handwrite their reports, describing what they observed in the photographs. These reports would be copied by hand for distribution. The process took hours, and the descriptions were often imprecise because handwritten reports made it difficult to include detailed coordinates, measurements, and technical specifications. With typewriters, photo interpreters could produce detailed formatted reports within minutes of completing their analysis. The reports could include precise coordinates, target dimensions, compass bearings, and other technical data formatted in standardized tables. Multiple copies ensured the information reached air operations planners, ground commanders, and artillery officers simultaneously. Reconnaissance to strike times, the critical interval from when a target was identified to when it could be attacked, were reduced by hours. Signal intelligence presented perhaps the most dramatic example of typewriter impact. Radio interception stations monitored enemy communications, intercepting hundreds or even thousands of messages per day. Operators would handwrite intercepts, noting the time, frequency, call signs, and message content. These handwritten intercepts would be passed to analysts who would attempt to extract intelligence from the often fragmentary and encoded information. The volume of intercepts was enormous, and the handwritten processing created severe bottlenecks. A single interceptor might produce 50 handwritten intercepts during an 8-hour shift. Those 50 sheets of paper, often with barely legible handwriting due to the speed required, would then queue for analysis. Analysts would struggle to read the handwriting, sometimes spending as much time deciphering the interceptor's handwriting as analyzing the actual intelligence content. Typewriters revolutionized this workflow. Some signal intelligence stations began having intercept operators type their intercepts directly, though this required finding personnel who could both operate radio equipment and type proficiently, a rare combination. More commonly, intercept operators continued handwriting their initial notes, but these were immediately typed by dedicated clerks who would simultaneously create multiple carbon copies for different analysis sections. The result was a massive increase in processing capacity. A signal intelligence section that could process perhaps 200 intercepts per day with handwritten methods could process 1,000 or more with typewritten workflows. The quality of analysis improved because analysts spent their time analyzing intelligence rather than deciphering handwriting. And the distribution of intercepts to multiple analysis cells simultaneously enabled parallel processing that identified patterns more quickly. The impact extended to strategic intelligence as well. The ultra-intelligence derived from breaking German Enigma codes at Bletchley Park generated enormous volumes of decrypted messages. These messages had to be translated, many were in German, analyzed, summarized, and distributed to commanders who held appropriate security clearances. The entire workflow depended on typewriters. At Bletchley Park, hundreds of typists worked in shifts, typing decrypted messages, intelligence summaries, and distribution copies. The typewriter rooms operated 24 hours per day, with the clatter of hundreds of machines producing the intelligence that would give Allied commanders unprecedented insight into German plans and operations. The British actually had to import typewriters and ribbons in substantial quantities to support Bletchley Park's operations alone. The distributed nature of intelligence processing meant that typewriters had to be available at every echelon. A corps-level intelligence section might receive intelligence from dozens of subordinate units, plus signals intelligence, aerial reconnaissance, prisoner interrogations, and ultra-decrypts if cleared for such access. Synthesizing this information into comprehensive intelligence summaries required substantial clerical effort. A typical corps intelligence summary might include executive summary of current enemy situation, detailed analysis of enemy forces opposite the corps sector, assessment of enemy capabilities and probable intentions, summary of recent intelligence sources, evaluation of intelligence reliability, maps and overlays showing enemy positions. Distribution list. Producing such a document daily required multiple typewriters operated by skilled personnel. The intelligence staff would draft sections, clerks would type them, and editors would assemble the final product. A comprehensive corps intelligence summary might run 20 to 30 pages with multiple copies required for distribution. Without typewriters, producing such documents would have been practically impossible at the required tempo. The intelligence summary would then be distributed to division commanders who would brief their subordinates. Those division commanders' intelligence sections would produce their own summaries incorporating the corps-level information plus intelligence specific to their divisions. This cascading process meant that a single piece of information, say, an intercept indicating a German panzer division was moving, would be typed and retyped at multiple echelons, each adding context and analysis appropriate for that level. The security implications of this system were significant. Every typewritten document was a potential security compromise if captured. The Germans certainly captured Allied intelligence documents throughout the war, and they studied these documents carefully to understand Allied intelligence capabilities and procedures. To mitigate security risks, several measures were implemented. First, document classification and handling procedures became more rigorous. Documents were marked with appropriate classification levels, and accountability systems tracked who received each copy. Second, sensitive documents were typed on special colored paper that would be immediately obvious if someone was carrying classified material. Third, disposal procedures required classified documents to be burned rather than simply discarded, and portable incinerators became standard equipment at intelligence sections. The Germans implemented similar measures, recognizing that their own typewritten intelligence documents could compromise operations if captured. Both sides engaged in ongoing games of intelligence and counterintelligence, with typewritten documents serving as both the medium of intelligence distribution and a potential vulnerability. The evolution of intelligence processing with typewriters also influenced the professional development of intelligence personnel. Before typewriters, intelligence officers needed to be good writers in the traditional sense, able to craft clear prose with pen and paper. With typewriters, the emphasis shifted toward analytical skills and the ability to organize information efficiently. The actual typing could be delegated to clerks, allowing intelligence officers to focus on analysis rather than document production. This specialization led to the development of dedicated intelligence clerk positions. These personnel would undergo training in both typing and intelligence procedures, learning the format and content requirements for various intelligence documents. The best intelligence clerks became invaluable, able to take rough notes from intelligence officers and transform them into professional quality intelligence reports with minimal supervision. The impact of portable typewriters on tactical operations becomes most evident when examining specific campaigns where intelligence processing directly influenced combat outcomes. The North African Italian and Northwest Europe campaigns all provide examples of how improved intelligence dissemination contributed to Allied tactical advantages. Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of North Africa in November 1942, marked one of the first large-scale applications of portable typewriter-enabled intelligence systems. American forces, newly arrived in theater, brought substantial quantities of portable typewriters with their intelligence and headquarters units. The contrast with British and especially French forces, who had fewer such machines, was notable in operational effectiveness. Lieutenant Colonel Benjamin Dixon, intelligence officer for the U.S. the Second Corps, later described the intelligence setup during the Tunisia campaign. "We had portable typewriters at every battalion. The reports flowed upward continuously. I could have an intelligence summary on General Patton's desk within 2 hours of information arriving from the front lines." The British admired our system tremendously, and we shared machines and techniques as supplies allowed. The ability to process intelligence rapidly proved crucial during the mobile operations in Tunisia. German forces under Rommel conducted aggressive maneuver warfare, seeking to defeat the inexperienced Americans before they could consolidate their positions. Rapid intelligence distribution allowed American commanders to track German movements and respond quickly to changing situations. One specific incident illustrates the advantage. On February 19, 1943, German forces attacked through Kasserine Pass, threatening to break through American positions and reach the supply bases around Tebessa. Intelligence officers at the front line typed reports describing the German attack, its composition, and direction. These reports reached Corps and Army headquarters within hours. Additional forces were redirected to block the German advance based on this intelligence. Contrast this with the German intelligence situation. German intelligence officers certainly had typewriters at higher headquarters, but portable machines were less common at tactical levels. German intelligence often arrived at Corps and Army headquarters many hours after events, having been handwritten at the front and then typed at intervening headquarters. The delay gave American forces precious time to react. The Italian campaign provided another laboratory for testing intelligence systems. The mountainous terrain and limited road networks created situations where small German forces could delay much larger Allied forces through skillful use of defensive positions. Breaking through these defenses required detailed intelligence about German positions, obstacles, and reinforcement capabilities. The intelligence challenge was compounded by the need to process information from multiple sources. Allied intelligence came from ground patrols, aerial reconnaissance, signal intercepts, prisoner interrogations, and Italian partisan reports. Synthesizing this information required dedicated intelligence sections with substantial clerical capacity. During the Battle of Monte Cassino in early 1944, the U.S. Fifth Army Intelligence Section processed over 500 intelligence reports per day at peak periods. Each report had to be read, analyzed, and incorporated into the overall intelligence picture. The most significant information had to be extracted and included in daily intelligence summaries, distributed to corps and division commanders. This processing would have been impossible without typewriters. The intelligence section had 12 portable typewriters in continuous operation, with clerks working in shifts around the clock. The section commander, Colonel Edward Fitch, estimated that the typewriters increased intelligence processing capacity by at least 500% compared to handwritten methods. "We could have done the job without typewriters," Fitch noted, "but it would have required 5 times as many intelligence officers, and even then we wouldn't have achieved the same timeliness." The Normandy invasion and subsequent campaign in Northwest Europe represented the culmination of intelligence processing capabilities. Planning for D-Day required processing enormous volumes of intelligence about German coastal defenses, unit locations, reinforcement capabilities, and defensive plans. The intelligence effort involved thousands of personnel across dozens of organizations, all generating typed reports, analyses, and summaries. The pre-invasion intelligence preparation included detailed terrain studies, order of battle analyses targeting information for air and naval bombardment, and beach landing plans. Every aspect required typed documentation, often in multiple copies for distribution to various planning staffs. The quantity of paper produced during D-Day planning has been estimated at over 1 million pages, virtually all typewritten. Once the campaign began, tactical intelligence became critical for exploiting the beachhead and breaking out into France. The bocage country of Normandy created situations where small German forces could inflict disproportionate casualties on attacking Allied units. Intelligence about German defensive positions, artillery locations, and reinforcement routes was essential for planning successful attacks. Intelligence sections with American, British, and Canadian divisions processed hundreds of reports daily during the intense fighting in June and July. 1944. The reports came from various sources: patrols encountering German positions, aerial reconnaissance identifying defensive works, prisoner interrogations revealing unit identities, and signal intelligence tracking German communications. A typical infantry division intelligence section during this period would include intelligence officer, S2, and assistant, aerial photograph interpreter, order of battle specialist tracking enemy units, terrain analysis section, prisoner interrogation team, document translation team, 4 to 6 intelligence clerks with portable typewriters, communications personnel linking to higher headquarters. The clerks with typewriters were essential to the entire operation. They typed interrogation reports, processed reconnaissance findings, prepared daily intelligence summaries, and handled distribution of intelligence products. During intense operations, these clerks might type 16 hours per day, producing hundreds of pages of intelligence documentation. The breakout from Normandy in late July 1944, Operation Cobra, demonstrated how effective intelligence processing contributed to tactical success. American forces had detailed intelligence on German positions, unit boundaries, weak points in defenses, and reinforcement capabilities. This intelligence allowed planners to concentrate overwhelming force at selected breakthrough points. After the breakthrough, the rapid advance across France created new intelligence challenges. American mechanized forces were moving 50 to 60 miles per day, far faster than in previous operations. Intelligence had to keep pace with these movements, identifying German positions ahead of the advance, locating bridges and road obstacles, and tracking German attempts to establish defensive lines. Portable typewriters enabled intelligence sections to function while mobile. Intelligence officers traveled with combat units, collected information, and typed reports in vehicles or wherever they could set up temporarily. The reports were then transmitted by radio or courier to higher headquarters. The entire system was designed for mobility and speed, qualities that would have been impossible with handwritten documentation. 3rd Army's Intelligence Section under Colonel Oscar Koch became renowned for its effectiveness during the race across France. Koch's section processed enormous volumes of intelligence, maintaining detailed tracking of German forces, even as the tactical situation changed hourly. Koch later attributed much of this success to having adequate clerical support with portable typewriters at every echelon. The surprise German offensive in the Ardennes in December 1944, the Battle of the Bulge, tested intelligence systems under the worst possible conditions. The German attack achieved initial surprise, disrupting Allied intelligence networks and capturing numerous intelligence personnel. The first 48 hours were chaotic, with incomplete and contradictory information reaching Allied headquarters. Yet within 3 days, Allied intelligence had reconstructed an accurate picture of German forces, objectives, and capabilities. This rapid intelligence reconstitution allowed Eisenhower and his commanders to make sound decisions about where to commit reserves and how to contain the German penetration. The speed of intelligence processing was partly enabled by having typewriters available to quickly produce reports, even under adverse conditions. Intelligence officers at surrounded American positions in Bastogne and elsewhere continued producing typed intelligence reports when possible, using portable typewriters that had been standard equipment in their units. These reports, when successfully transmitted or carried by courier, provided headquarters with ground truth about German movements and intentions. Behind every typed intelligence report, every order, every operational summary, was a human being operating a typewriter, often under difficult conditions that civilians would find unimaginable. Understanding the human experience of battlefield typing provides essential context for appreciating this technology's impact. Corporal Alice Williams of the Women's Army Corps worked as an intelligence clerk with the U.S. 1st Army headquarters in France during 1944. Her oral history, recorded in 1988, provides vivid detail about the work. We operated in shifts. 4 of us clerks with our portable typewriters set up in whatever building the headquarters occupied. Sometimes it was a proper building with desks. Other times it was a barn or a tent with boards across sawhorses for typing surfaces. We typed intelligence reports from handwritten notes, prepared distribution copies, and formatted the daily intelligence summary that went to all subordinate units. The work was relentless during active operations. Reports would arrive continuously from forward units. We'd type them immediately, make carbon copies, and send them forward to the intelligence officers for review. If information was urgent, we'd interrupt whatever else we were doing. I once typed a prisoner interrogation report while German artillery was shelling the area about a quarter-mile away. You could hear the explosions, but the report had to go out immediately because it indicated a German counterattack was forming. The typewriters themselves were remarkably reliable, but they required care. We learned to cover them when not in use to keep out dust and moisture. We cleaned them when we had time, though that wasn't often. Ribbons were precious. We'd use them until they were so faded you could barely read the type, then carefully reverse them to use the other side. What people don't understand is the responsibility we felt. We knew that commanders were making life and death decisions based on the intelligence we typed. If we made an error, missed up a unit designation, or transposed coordinates, people could die. So we checked and rechecked everything. Even working fast, even exhausted, we maintained accuracy. Williams's account highlights several aspects of the typist's experience that official records rarely capture. First, the working conditions were often primitive. Intelligence sections moved frequently, following the advance of combat units. Each move required packing typewriters, moving to new locations, and setting up operations again, often within hours. Second, the work was high pressure and high stakes. Intelligence clerks weren't typing routine correspondence. They were processing information that directly affected tactical operations. The knowledge that their work mattered created both motivation and stress. Third, the technical requirements of typing in field conditions demanded skills beyond standard office typing. Clerks learned to type on unstable surfaces, in poor lighting, and with various distractions from nearby combat operations. They developed techniques for maintaining accuracy despite these challenges. The physical demands were significant as well. Typing for 8 to 16 hours per day caused repetitive strain injuries. Clerks developed hand and wrist pain, back problems from poor posture at improvised workstations, and eye strain from working in inadequate lighting. These injuries were rarely documented as combat-related, but were nonetheless casualties of the intelligence war. The portable typewriters themselves became personalized tools. Clerks developed preferences for specific machines, learning their quirks and idiosyncrasies. Each typewriter had slight variations in key resistance, spacing, and impression. Experienced typists could identify their own machine by feel alone and could compensate for its particular characteristics to produce optimal results. Technical Sergeant Robert Mitchell, an intelligence analyst with the British 21st Army Group, provided a different perspective on typewriter use in his post-war memoir. As an analyst, I didn't do the actual typing. We had clerks for that, but I worked closely with the typed product. The quality of the typing directly affected how quickly I could analyze information. A well-formatted report with clear headings and consistent spacing allowed rapid scanning for relevant details. Poorly formatted reports required careful reading of every word. We developed standard formats for different types of intelligence reports. Prisoner interrogations followed one format. Reconnaissance reports followed another. Signal intelligence summaries had their own structure. These formats became so standardized that experienced personnel could extract the key information from a report almost at a glance. The typewriter was the interface between field collection and headquarters analysis. Information flowed from observers at the front who handwrote their initial notes, through typists who formatted it properly, to analysts like me who extracted meaning, and then back through typists who prepared summaries for commanders. At every stage, the typewriter was the tool that translated human observation and thought into distributable intelligence. Mitchell's observation about formatting reveals an often overlooked aspect of the typewriter's impact. The machine enforced structure and consistency on intelligence reporting. While handwritten reports could be formatted in countless individual ways, depending on the writer's preferences, typewritten reports, following standard formats, created consistency that improved processing efficiency across entire intelligence systems. The development of these standard formats represented an evolution in intelligence practice. Early in the war, formats were relatively informal and variable. As experience accumulated, intelligence organizations codified format standards that balanced comprehensiveness with brevity, included all essential information, and presented it in logical order. A standardized prisoner interrogation report, for example, would include header, date, time, location, unit conducting interrogation, POW number. Section 1. Prisoner personal data, rank, name, unit, position. Section 2. Circumstances of capture. Section 3. Interrogation summary. Key points in bullet format. Section 4. Detailed interrogation transcript. Section 5. Interrogator assessment of reliability. Section 6. Distribution recommendations. This format could be typed quickly from handwritten interrogation notes. Anyone reading the report knew exactly where to find specific information. Analysts processing dozens of interrogation reports could quickly extract the most significant details without reading entire documents. Similar standardization occurred across all intelligence document types. The result was a system where information could be processed with unprecedented efficiency by personnel at all levels. Junior intelligence officers at battalion level could produce reports that met Corps or Army standards. Clerks could format documents correctly without extensive supervision. Analysts could process information rapidly because they knew what to expect from each document type. The psychological dimension of battlefield typing deserves attention as well. For many intelligence personnel, particularly those in rear echelon positions, typing was their contribution to the war effort. They weren't engaging the enemy directly, but they knew their work enabled others to do so effectively. This knowledge provided meaning and motivation despite the often tedious nature of the work. Some intelligence clerks volunteered specifically for intelligence work, attracted by the idea of contributing intellectually rather than physically. Others were assigned to intelligence sections based on typing skills demonstrated during initial training. Regardless of how they arrived in their positions, most developed pride in their work and identity as intelligence professionals. The gender dynamics were complex and varied by nationality. American and British forces employed substantial numbers of women in intelligence typing roles, both in rear areas and, increasingly as the war progressed, in forward locations. The Women's Army Corps in America and the Auxiliary Territorial Service in Britain provided thousands of trained clerks and typists for intelligence work. These women faced challenges beyond the demanding work itself. They often encountered skepticism from male officers who questioned whether women could function effectively in military environments. They had to prove their competence repeatedly and demonstrate that they could maintain productivity despite the stress and danger of operating near combat zones. The Soviet Union took a different approach, integrating women into combat roles more extensively than Western nations, but also employing them in intelligence and administrative positions. Soviet intelligence operations relied heavily on typewritten documentation, and Soviet forces had substantial numbers of female personnel in intelligence typing positions. The relationships between intelligence officers, analysts, and clerks also evolved during the war. Early in the war, the relationships were often formal and hierarchical, with officers dictating to clerks who typed verbatim. As operations became more complex and tempo increased, the relationships became more collaborative. Experienced clerks would suggest formatting improvements, flag inconsistencies, and sometimes identify errors in content based on their familiarity with intelligence procedures. This collaboration improved both efficiency and quality. Officers learned to trust their clerks' judgment on formatting and presentation issues. Clerks learned enough about intelligence content to recognize when something seemed unusual or incorrect and should be queried before distribution. The result was an informal but effective quality control system embedded in the typing process itself. The widespread use of typewriters for intelligence processing created significant security challenges that both Allied and Axis forces struggled to address throughout the war. Every typewritten document was a potential intelligence source for the enemy, and captured documents could reveal not just their content but also the systems and procedures used to produce them. The most obvious security concern was document capture. Both sides captured substantial quantities of enemy intelligence documents throughout the war. These documents provided multiple layers of intelligence value beyond their immediate content. They revealed intelligence collection methods, analysis techniques, distribution procedures, and organizational structures. They could identify specific units and personnel, and they could inform enemy understanding of friendly intelligence capabilities. The British learned this lesson painfully in North Africa during 1941–1942. German forces captured numerous British intelligence documents during various operations, including the fall of Tobruk in June 1942. Analysis of these documents by German intelligence officers revealed British signal intelligence capabilities, including the fact that British forces were reading some German communications. The Germans responded by improving their communication security, changing codes and procedures, which temporarily reduced British intelligence effectiveness. The incident prompted a comprehensive review of British document security procedures, resulting in stricter classification systems, better document control, and more thorough destruction procedures for classified material. The Americans implemented relatively sophisticated document security systems from the beginning of their involvement in the European theater. Every classified document had to be accounted for through a registry system. When documents were created, they were logged with serial numbers. Distribution was tracked, with recipients signing for documents they received. Destruction required witness and documentation. The system was bureaucratic and sometimes unwieldy, but it ensured that classified documents were controlled systematically. The portable typewriters created particular challenges within this system. A typewriter at a fixed headquarters could have its output logged systematically, with someone assigned to account for every document produced. But portable typewriters moved with combat units, operated in fluid tactical situations, and often produced documents under circumstances where formal accountability was difficult or impossible. The solution involved accepting calculated risk. Forward units were authorized to produce intelligence documents without the full accountability procedures required at rear headquarters. Instead, the emphasis was on rapid destruction of documents that were no longer needed. Units were issued portable document burners, essentially. Metal containers where classified documents could be burned, and standing orders required that classified documents be destroyed rather than abandoned if a position had to be evacuated. This system worked imperfectly. German forces certainly captured substantial numbers of Allied intelligence documents throughout the war. But the rapid destruction procedures limited the intelligence value of most captures. Documents more than a day or two old had limited tactical value, and the most sensitive documents were usually destroyed before they could be captured. The Germans faced similar challenges and implemented similar procedures. German units had document destruction requirements, and portable incinerators were standard equipment. But German document security sometimes suffered during retreats and withdrawals, when units had to abandon equipment and positions rapidly. Allied forces captured massive quantities of German documents in 1944–1945, particularly during the rapid advance across France and Germany. One security aspect unique to typewriters was the typewriter fingerprint phenomenon. Every typewriter produces text with unique characteristics based on slight variations in how keys strike the page, imperfections in individual type elements, and other mechanical factors. Forensic document examiners can match documents to specific typewriters by analyzing these characteristics. Both Allied and Axis intelligence services were aware of this capability and attempted to exploit it. The British Special Operations Executive ISO was particularly concerned about typewriter fingerprints, because documents typed by resistance organizations could potentially be traced if the Germans captured both the documents and the typewriters. OE developed several countermeasures. Some were simple, such as advising resistance groups to dispose of typewriters after using them for particularly sensitive documents. Others were more sophisticated, such as deliberately misaligning type elements on typewriters used for deception documents, making the typewriter fingerprint misleading about the document's origin. The Germans had similar concerns and capabilities. The Geheimfeldpolizei, secret field police, employed document examiners who analyzed captured Allied documents, attempting to identify which units produced them based on typewriter characteristics. This intelligence could reveal unit locations, command relationships, and order of battle. The effectiveness of typewriter fingerprint analysis was limited by practical factors. The sheer volume of documents and typewriters made systematic analysis impossible. A single army might have thousands of typewriters in service, and analyzing every captured document against every potential typewriter would require more resources than could be justified. Analysis was typically limited to documents of particular intelligence significance. Another security consideration involved the carbon paper used to create document copies. Carbon paper was expensive and scarce during wartime, so it was standard practice to use each sheet multiple times until it was exhausted. But used carbon paper retained impressions of previous documents typed on it. If used carbon paper was captured, text from previous documents could be recovered by careful examination. Security procedures required that used carbon paper be destroyed along with classified documents. But this requirement was inconsistently followed, particularly in forward units where the emphasis was on speed and where carbon paper was so scarce that discarding it seemed wasteful. Occasionally, carbon paper became a source of intelligence when captured by the enemy. The encryption of typewritten documents was considered but generally rejected as impractical for most military communications. Encrypted documents required coding and decoding equipment, specialized personnel, and significantly more time to produce and process. For routine intelligence reports and orders, the delay would have negated much of the timeliness advantage that typewriters provided. Instead, the standard approach was physical security controlling document distribution, accounting for copies and destroying documents when no longer needed. Classification markings, secret, confidential, etc., vindicated handling requirements, and personnel with access to classified information underwent security vetting. The most sensitive intelligence, particularly ultra-intelligence derived from breaking Enigma, was never committed to standard-typed documents. Ultra-intelligence was handled through special security channels with separate typing facilities, special security paper, and extremely limited distribution. The typewriters used for ultra-documents were kept in secure facilities and never used for other purposes. Counterintelligence operations sometimes deliberately used typewriters to create deception documents. Operation Fortitude, the deception plan convincing the Germans that the D-Day landings would occur at Pas-de-Calais rather than Normandy, involved generating thousands of false documents about non-existent units and operations. These documents had to appear authentic, which meant they had to be properly typed on appropriate forms with correct formatting. The deception documents were typed using machines that matched the characteristics of documents that would genuinely originate from the purported sources. If a document was supposedly from a unit in England, it would be typed on a machine in England using paper and carbon copies consistent with that unit's administrative procedures. The attention to detail extended to deliberately including minor errors and inconsistencies that would appear in genuine documents. Some deception operations were remarkably sophisticated. Documents would be created, deliberately arranged to be captured by German agents or through other channels, and then carefully monitored to determine whether the Germans believed them. The success of these operations depended partly on the documents appearing genuine, which required that they be indistinguishable from authentic military documents, properly typed, formatted, and marked. The military's massive consumption of typewriters and related supplies created substantial logistical and industrial challenges. Understanding these challenges provides insight into how modern warfare demands not just weapons and equipment, but also the administrative infrastructure to manage and employ those weapons effectively. The sheer scale of typewriter supply requirements was unprecedented. A portable typewriter in continuous military use might last 12 to 18 months before wearing out, or becoming unrepairable in field conditions. With hundreds of thousands of machines in service, the replacement demand alone required substantial ongoing production. Additionally, new units being formed and existing units expanding required additional machines. The U.S. military's procurement planning documents from 1943 estimated annual typewriter requirements at approximately 150,000 machines across all types, with roughly 60,000 being portable models for field use. British requirements were proportionally smaller but still substantial at 30,000 to 40,000 machines annually. These numbers exceeded the entire pre-war commercial portable typewriter market in both countries. Meeting this demand required prioritizing military contracts over civilian sales. In America, the War Production Board regulated typewriter manufacturing, essentially directing the entire industry's output toward military requirements. Civilian purchases were restricted, and the existing civilian inventory had to suffice for the duration of the war. Similar restrictions applied in Britain, where civilian typewriter sales ceased entirely in 1942. The manufacturing process for portable typewriters was relatively labor-intensive and required skilled workers. Key components required precision machining to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. Final assembly required skilled technicians who could adjust mechanisms for proper operation. The labor requirements competed with other military manufacturing needs, particularly as the war expanded and workforce shortages became acute. Several manufacturers addressed labor shortages by simplifying designs and production processes. Components that had been individually hand-fitted were redesigned for interchangeability. Assembly procedures were broken into simpler steps that could be performed by less skilled workers. These modifications reduced manufacturing time and cost while maintaining adequate functionality for military requirements. The supply chain extended far beyond the typewriters themselves. Each typewriter required ongoing supply of ribbons, which wore out and needed regular replacement. A typewriter producing 20 pages per day would exhaust a standard ribbon in approximately 2 weeks. With hundreds of thousands of typewriters in continuous operation, ribbon consumption reached millions of units annually. Typewriter ribbon manufacturing involved its own supply chain: cloth for the ribbon base, ink for saturating the cloth, metal spools for holding the ribbon, and packaging for distribution. The military's ribbon requirements consumed substantial portions of national textile and ink production. In Britain, where textile production was already strained by military uniform requirements, typewriter ribbon production received lower priority, leading to periodic shortages that affected intelligence operations. The distribution system for typewriters and supplies posed another challenge. Typewriters had to move from factories to ports, across oceans to overseas theaters, through theater supply depots to Army-level logistics centers, then to divisions and subordinate units. The supply chain extended thousands of miles and involved multiple modes of transportation, each with its own handling and packaging requirements. Typewriters are relatively fragile compared to most military equipment. The packaging had to protect mechanisms from shock and moisture during shipping while not being so bulky that shipping capacity was wasted. The manufacturers developed specialized shipping containers, usually wooden crates with internal cushioning, that provided adequate protection while maintaining reasonable shipping efficiency. The maintenance and repair system required its own infrastructure. While portable typewriters were designed for field maintenance, some repairs required specialized tools and replacement parts. The military established typewriter repair facilities at various levels: theater-level shops that could perform major repairs and overhauls, Army-level shops for intermediate repairs, and field maintenance capabilities at division level for basic repairs and cleaning. Training repair technicians required establishing specialized schools. The U.S. Army operated several typewriter repair training courses at various installations, typically 4 weeks of instruction covering disassembly, repair techniques, parts identification, and adjustment procedures. Similar training programs existed in British forces. The trained technicians then served in dedicated repair units or augmented intelligence section maintenance capabilities. The spare parts supply system was complex. Each typewriter model had hundreds of individual parts, many specific to that model. The military operated typewriters from multiple manufacturers, each with different parts requirements. The logistics system had to stock adequate quantities of thousands of different part numbers and distribute them to repair facilities worldwide. Standardization efforts attempted to reduce this complexity. The military encouraged manufacturers to use common parts where feasible. Some components, like paper rolls and ribbon spools, were standardized across all manufacturers. But complete standardization proved impossible given the different designs and the need to procure machines from multiple sources to ensure adequate supply. The disposal and reclamation system completed the logistics cycle. Worn-out typewriters that couldn't be economically repaired were declared surplus and processed for reclamation. Usable parts were salvaged for spare parts stocks. Metal components were recycled for remelting and reuse in new production. This reclamation recovered substantial quantities of strategic materials, particularly copper and steel alloys used in typewriter mechanisms. The industrial effort required to sustain military typewriter operations represented a significant slice of national production capacity. In America, typewriter manufacturing employed approximately 30,000 workers at peak wartime production in 1943–1944, supporting industries ribbons, paper, carbon paper, shipping containers, repair tools employed thousands more. The total industrial effort rivaled that required for some major weapons systems. This allocation of resources to what might seem like mundane office equipment reflected military understanding that modern warfare requires administrative capacity. Armies don't function on courage and weapons alone. They require information processing, decision-making, and communication systems. The typewriter was essential infrastructure for these systems. as important in its way as radios for communications or trucks for logistics. The investment in typewriter infrastructure paid dividends throughout the war and into the post-war period. The machines, procedures, and trained personnel established during wartime provided foundations for post-war military administration. The U.S. military continued using typewriters as primary documentation equipment through the 1980s, when computers began replacing them for most functions. The end of World War II created a massive surplus of military typewriters. Hundreds of thousands of machines that had served in various theaters were declared excess to peacetime requirements and processed for disposal. This surplus shaped civilian typewriter markets for years and contributed to broader changes in office work and administration. The U.S. military alone declared approximately 400,000 typewriters surplus between 1945 and 1947. Some were transferred to other government agencies. Many were sold to educational institutions, businesses, and individuals through government surplus sales. The availability of these well-made but used machines suppressed new typewriter sales for several years, affecting manufacturers' post-war recovery. The portable typewriters that had served in combat conditions were generally worn but often still functional. Veterans who had used typewriters during their service sometimes purchased surplus machines for personal or business use. The machines served as tangible connections to military service and provided practical functionality for post-war careers and education. The impact on intelligence practices extended far beyond the immediate post-war period. The systems and procedures developed for processing typewritten intelligence during World War II became foundations for Cold War intelligence operations. The CIA, established in 1947, inherited many of World War II intelligence practices, including document formatting standards, processing procedures, and distribution systems, all built around typewriter-produced documents. Military intelligence training in the post-war era continued emphasizing the skills developed during World War II: rapid document processing, standardized formatting, efficient distribution, and security procedures. Officer training at various service schools included instruction on intelligence documentation using typewriters. This training continued until computers became practical for field use in the 1980s and 1990s. The Soviet Union's observation of Allied intelligence practices during the war influenced Soviet military doctrine and organization. Soviet military intelligence adopted many procedural elements from Allied practice, including typewriter-based documentation systems. The Soviet military procured thousands of typewriters for intelligence use, both domestic models and captured German machines with Cyrillic keyboards. The evolution of office technology gradually rendered typewriters obsolete for military intelligence work. The introduction of practical computers in the 1970s and 1980s provided capabilities that typewriters could never match: easy editing, automated formatting, electronic distribution, and database integration. But the transition was gradual, and typewriters remained common in military use through the 1990s. Some military units deployed to Gulf War in 1991 still carried portable typewriters as backup for computer systems. The typewriters provided capabilities that couldn't fail due to power loss, software problems, or electronic malfunctions. This redundancy proved valuable in desert conditions where electronic equipment faced reliability challenges from heat, dust, and sand. The last U.S. military procurement of typewriters occurred in the late 1990s, primarily for use in situations requiring hard copy documentation in environments where computers were impractical. The Marine Corps maintained stocks of manual typewriters through the early 2000s for use in field conditions where electronic equipment might be unavailable. The historical significance of the battlefield typewriter extends beyond its specific technical contributions. It represents a broader principle that modern military forces require information processing capabilities as fundamental as firepower and mobility. The armies that recognized this principle and invested in information infrastructure gained advantages that translated into operational success. The typewriter also exemplifies how seemingly mundane technologies can have strategic impact. It wasn't a dramatic innovation like radar or the atomic bomb. It wasn't even particularly new technology. Typewriters had existed for decades before World War II, but the recognition that this existing technology could be adapted and deployed at scale to solve critical military problems demonstrated organizational sophistication that characterized successful military institutions. The battlefield typewriter's contribution to Allied victory in World War II was neither dramatic nor immediately obvious. No battles were won or lost because one side had better typewriters. No crucial intelligence breakthrough depended solely on typing efficiency. No major strategic decision turned on the availability of portable typewriters. Yet collectively, across thousands of intelligence sections and millions of documents, the typewriter enabled the information processing that underpinned Allied intelligence superiority. The ability to collect, process, analyze, and distribute intelligence faster and more comprehensively than opponents provided advantages that accumulated across every campaign and theater. This superiority wasn't preordained or automatic. It resulted from deliberate decisions to invest in information infrastructure, from recognizing that intelligence effectiveness depended on administrative capacity, and from the dedication of thousands of intelligence personnel who used typewriters daily under difficult conditions to produce the documentation that kept commanders informed. The typists themselves, mostly young men and women performing unglamorous but essential work, deserve recognition alongside the more celebrated contributors to victory. They worked long hours under stress, maintained accuracy despite pressure, and took pride in work that directly supported combat operations. Their contribution exemplifies how warfare depends on the collective efforts of millions, most performing tasks that receive little attention but are nonetheless essential. The legacy extends beyond military history into broader understanding of how organizations process information. The principles learned from World War II intelligence operations, standardized formats, distributed processing, rapid distribution, security procedures, influenced both military and civilian information management practices for decades. Modern information systems differ radically in technology but still reflect many procedural concepts developed during the typewriter era. As we stand now in an age of instant electronic communication, where documents are created and distributed globally in seconds, it's easy to forget that these capabilities are very recent. Through most of World War II, the cutting edge of information technology was the portable typewriter, enabling intelligence officers to produce legible documents in minutes rather than hours. That technological limitation shaped how intelligence was collected, processed, and employed. It created opportunities for those who understood its potential and implemented it effectively. And it contributed to outcomes that changed the course of history. The battlefield typewriter helped win the intelligence war by enabling the transformation of data into intelligence, intelligence into knowledge, and knowledge into action. The machines themselves mostly disappeared long ago, scrapped, surplused, or worn out through decades of use. But their influence persists in the systems, procedures, and organizational thinking they helped create. The next time you see a vintage typewriter in a museum or antique store, consider that similar machines once served on battlefields, in intelligence centers, and in headquarters worldwide, their keys struck by personnel who understood that their work mattered and who contributed to victory one typed page at a time.